Good day, everyone! I am Marian Bustos, and together with Kyle Ponesto, Jaisel Ortiz, Basti Banao, Nimuel de la Cruz, and Carmela Ebuenga, we will discuss Charles Darwin's theory and concepts of evolution, natural selection, and adaptation.
Before we discuss Darwin's theory of evolution, natural selection, and adaptation, let us first introduce him by giving a brief background on him. So, Charles Darwin was born in 1809 in Shrewsbury, England. He was a British naturalist and biologist, and he was a prominent figure in the field of biology. So, Darwin was fascinated by the natural world from a young age. So, known for his theory of evolution and his understanding of the process of natural selection. And he won the awards of Copley Medal in 1864, Fellow of the Royal Society in 1839, Wollaston Medal during 1859 also, and the Royal Medal in 1853. And he died on April 19, 1882. And Charles Darwin's theory hugely impacted scientific thought, but his ideas also affected the realms of politics, economics, and literature for its controversy and the thought at that time.
The basic idea of biological evolution is that populations and species of organisms change over time. Today, when we think of evolution, we are likely to link this idea with one specific person, the British naturalist Charles Darwin. In the 1850s, Darwin wrote an influential and controversial book called On the Origin of Species. In it, he proposed that species evolve and that all living things can trace their descent to a common ancestor. However, what is a species? A species is a group of similar organisms that can interbreed with each other to make healthy, fertile offspring. For instance, all humans belong to the same species, Homo sapiens. However, domestic dogs are also a species, Canis familiaris. At about 500 pages in its original edition, On the Origin of Species is Charles Darwin magnum opus and quite possibly the most influential non-fiction book ever written. Darwin's seminal book On the Origin of Species set forth his ideas about evolution and natural selection. These ideas were largely based on direct observation from Darwin's travels around the globe. From 1831 to 1836, he was part of a survey expedition carried out by the ship HMS Beagle, which included stops in South America, Australia, and the southern tip of Africa. At each of the expedition stops, Darwin had the opportunity to study and catalog the local plants and animals. During his voyage and in the years after, Darwin developed and refined a set of ideas that could explain the patterns he had observed during his voyage. In his book On the Origin of Species, Darwin outlined his two key ideas, evolution and natural selection. So first, let us define the word evolution. Evolution is the process by which nature selects from the genetic diversity of a population those traits that would make an individual more likely to survive and reproduce in a continuously changing environment. Over many years and many generations, the full diversity of life on Earth is expressed. Evolution is one of the most fundamental organizing principles of the biological sciences, and as such, is the single most dominant theme in biology today. As you can see, this is Darwin's tree of life. Modern-day species appear at the top of the chart, while the ancestors from which they arose are shown lower in the chart. So Darwin proposed that species can change over time, that new species come from pre-existing species, and that all species share a common ancestor. In this model, each species has its own unique set of heritable differences from the common ancestor, which have accumulated gradually over very long time periods. Repeated branching events in which new species split off from a common ancestor produce a multi-level tree that links all living organisms. So Darwin referred to this process in which groups of organisms change in their heritable traits over generations as descent with modification. Today, we call it evolution. Darwin's sketch above illustrates his idea, showing how one species can branch into two over time and how this process can repeat multiple times in the family tree of a group of related species.
Natural selection is the process through which populations of living organisms adapt and change. Individuals are naturally variable, which means that we are all different in some ways. This variation means that some individuals have traits better suited to the environment than others. Individuals with adaptive traits have the advantage that they are more likely to survive and reproduce. These individuals then pass the adaptive traits onto their offspring. Over time, these advantageous traits become more common in the population. Through this process of natural selection, favorable traits are transmitted through generations. Charles Darwin went on a 5-year voyage in South America and on the islands in the Pacific. In that voyage, he studied plants, animals, and fossils. Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace proposed that evolution occurs because of a phenomenon called natural selection. He wrote a definitive book outlining his idea of natural selection on the origin of species. Here are some of Darwin's concepts of natural selection that were based on several key observations. Traits are often heritable. In living organisms, many characteristics are inherited or passed from parent to offspring. More offspring are produced than can survive. Organisms are capable of producing more offspring than their environments can support. Thus, there is a competition for limited resources in each generation. Offspring vary in their heritable traits. The offspring in any generation will be slightly different from one another in their traits, may it be color, size, or shape, and many of these features will be heritable. Based on simple observations, Charles Darwin concluded the following. In a population, some individuals will inherit traits that will help them survive and reproduce, given the conditions of the environment such as the predators and food sources present. The individuals with helpful traits will leave more offspring in the next generation, since the traits make them more effective at surviving and reproducing. Because the helpful traits are heritable and organisms with these traits leave more offspring, the traits will tend to become more common in the next generation. Over generations, the population will become adapted to its environment as individuals with traits helpful in that environment have consistently greater reproductive success than their peers.
Darwin chose the name natural selection to contrast with artificial selection or selective breeding that is controlled by humans. He argued that natural selection explained how a wide variety of life forms develop over time from a single common ancestor. Darwin did not know that genes existed, but he could see that many traits are heritable. Mutation are changes in the structure of the molecules that make up the genes called DNA. They can be harmful, neutral, or sometimes helpful, resulting in a new advantageous trait. When mutation occur in germ cells, they can be passed on to offspring. The mutation of genes is an important source of genetic variation with a population. Extinction can be caused by invading species, a disease organism, a catastrophic environmental change, or a very successful predator. Extinction is mostly caused by human acts like overhunting and habitat degradation. Today, it appears that extinctions are occurring at a considerably quicker rate than in the past. There are 6 steps for natural selection to occur. First, overproduction. All species tend to have more than 2 offspring per pair. Organisms produce more offspring than can survive. Second, variation. Differences or variation occur among individuals. Some variations are passed to offspring. Third, competition. Living space and food are limited, so offspring from each generation must compete among themselves in order to live. Fourth, survival of the fittest. Those best suited to the environment survive. Reproduction. Those who survive pass on favorable traits. And last, specification. Accumulated changes in population lead to a new species.
Adaptation. Adaptation theory, also known as survival theory or survival of the fittest. is an organism's ability to adapt to changes in its environment and adjust accordingly over time. Adaptations occur over generations of a species with those traits that help an individual animal eat and mate, most obviously being passed down from generation to generation until the whole species changes to be better suited to their environment. Adaptation is based on the concept that populations of organisms change over time as a result of natural selection. Adaptive evolution is driven by increased survivorship and/or increased reproductive success. This happens when a collection of individuals in a population gains an advantage because of special traits that they share in common. Before Charles Darwin, other scientists such as Aristotle and Lamarck accepted that fact. Species change, but didn't fully understand the reason behind the changes, or that adaptation was a continual process without a final form. Adaptation theory proposed three changes when habitat changes: habitat tracking, genetic change, or extinction. Of the three, only genetic change is the adaptation. Habitat tracking and extinction. Habitat tracking is when a species follows a habitat change or find another environment similar to the one it lived in before. When a species is unable to move or change, the result is the species dying out or becoming extinct.
We would like to end our presentation with a quote from Darwin himself. The love for all living creatures is the most notable attribute of man. Indeed, we humans are given intellectual capacity to understand other living creatures, but that does not mean we have the right to take advantage and benefit from them. So we humans of all living creatures should take care of others because we are given knowledge and the capacity to think, giving others the chance to flourish and a chance at life. With that, thank you for listening.